Hi everyone, my name's Deb Polson. I'm from RMIT, I'm the Professor of Digital Design and also a director of a brand new centre called the Centre for Digital Ecosystems, which isn't quite launched yet, so please don't ask any questions. But today we've got this amazing panel around provocative play, and essentially we're looking at how games teams and games engines and game approaches can be adopted in non-game tech contexts, and what that means for us and how they can be agents for change. One of the common things for all of our speakers I've realised through talking with them is that what we do through play is smuggle in the hard stuff, right? So our games aren't about, overcoming tasks to save a princess or win a race. We've got other motivations. And for games have motivation mechanics, agency levels, adoption processes, and progress algorithms. So how do we adopt these sorts of things to tell different types of stories? And how do we make unwinnable games as well? Like, not all games can be won, especially when you're looking at climate crisis. So the way we view video games is that they're worlds, usually interactive, and how you play in these worlds is limited by the rules designed by the makers of that world. Does that sound familiar? Does that not just sound like life? Right? Like, we all live in a world of rules made by people we've never met. So, in a way, a game is just a slice of that life and telling one story. But what it does is helps us concentrate on a story to be told by a designer or an artist. And so today we've got this amazing collection of artist designers. Now, all three of them reject labels and titles, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We struggled to say exactly what they are, and I totally get that because, we are what we need to be at any given time. So we've got Johnson Witehira from Wellington, Aotearoa, and he'll be talking after me. And what we'll do is just give you just a quick presentation to show you our practice as a way to contextualise the questions. So bear that in mind. We're going to try and give you just a snapshot of the sorts of things we do. So what we might do is I'm just going to kick off with some of the practice I've done in games for the last 3 decades. And one of the first games I ever made was with Acme, and there's people in this room who made that game with me. Hi, Justina, hi, Vince. It was a game in place. So if we go to my first slide, I didn't really know what I was going to talk about today, so what I normally do is just throw like a whole bunch of work on slides and then figure out what I'm going to talk about on the day when I've listened to all these other wonderful talks, which were just marvellous. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kinds of work I do. It's always with small games teams, so normally with me as a game designer, a games programmer, a technical artist, usually a UI person and a sound designer. And they're all here today, my team. I was like, hi everyone. So basically, small teams, no project takes longer than a year, and they're all made as part of an academic process, so usually on the side. So none of the games you see, don't expect to see, slickness of an entertainment game because we have 6 months, 3 months and low budgets to make these sorts of things. So in that context, it's small teams over small amounts of time with very small resources. So the first type of game I make, a lot of the games I make are games in place, and really they're about but also they sort of transform that place. And one of the games we're working on right at the moment, did that clip, is it's with a partner, industry partner who owns a lot of the buildings in the city and in regions. And what we were thinking about was we make inside-out games. So we make a world in a virtual world, and then we present that back in a physical space. And what we're trying to do is, instead of making these kind of wow things in maybe in a museum or anything, what we're trying to do is transform people's everyday mundane spaces. And not just to be delightful, but also once they've seen the delight, how do we then challenge them into a more contemplative state in their everyday places? So one of the ones we're making at the moment in these transition ugly, we talk about making ugly spaces, beautiful worlds. And this was the one-page pitch I gave them and we got funding from. Just these 2 images. That's it. And we've made this world, well, Iris, who was here, and Caleb made this world, a technical artist, a games programmer. And we basically made a world of a virtual forest, and I know, why make a virtual forest? The real ones are better. Totally agree. But this is about reminding people in place what is lost and what is at risk. And we've made this beautiful world, and then what we do is we go and scan the physical place and put that physical world in the virtual one, and then work out how to make that. So, for example, this is a pretty bland, awful transition space from the chaos of the city in a car park where you've probably had a fight with someone. And basically, we project these worlds on there and they're interactive. And we've got this idea that when you go in that elevator, you're inside a tree. And as you're going up and down, you're going up and down inside that tree. And you're also learning about the local forest. So this forest is based on a lot of the things that we have observed in the Lilydale area, the forests around there. And you know, we make these interactive, so we put sensors like just basic industrial LiDAR scanners that know where people are. And basically, as you walk past, you rustle trees, you disturb bees. You know, so there's these little delightful things, but then there's going to be some messaging in there about the forests themselves. But my favourite thing about doing games in place, and sorry to talk really fast, I've got a big counter, familiar strangers is one of my favourite things. Like when I first made the game with Acme, I understood what it might take, how a game can motivate strangers to cooperate and to compete in a space, in a public space together. How do you help people cross that threshold together and become familiar strangers? So I sort of based it on something like battleships, I know, sorry, but basically what this game was is there's a projection of this ship is going down at sea, and you're basically in this control zone, and as you walk around on this grid, so basically there's the ship, and there's like fires breaking out and water's spouting, and you have to go and run and hold onto that and like stamp out the fire or hold the water as a robot comes on the boat and fixes it up. But then there's a cooperative moment where the Kraken is awoken, and this Kraken arm comes up and waves around, and everyone has to line up to protect the ship as the Kraken arm comes down. So, but also what happens in this sensor environment here, it can tell how many people are in there. So it makes the challenge fun for one person or 20 people, right? So it builds its capacity for cooperation. And what I love about these two is there's usually more people spectating than are playing. So you're creating a spectacle as well. But you're also creating a lot of noise. And one thing I did realise when I first worked with ACME and NGV, these institutions actually want noise and vibrancy in their spaces. So I kind of took that quite seriously. So this gets pretty noisy, but it's just really basic. It's just sensors on the floor, projected world. I'm going to scoot through. This is a much bigger version of that, and ask me later if you want to know about that project. But this one here was a much bigger zone using the same. A whole theatre was covered in sensors, and you went to this virtual world. So, but one of my other things, other than familiar strangers, is the extreme collaborations you can do through games, right? So the Beatles wouldn't have been successful if they were all drummers. My team is so sick of hearing that. But like, it's really, really true. So if you kind of, I've collaborated with a lot of different people and showing them how games. So this one is one I worked with plant biologists and nutritionists, and I basically made, you know, when you can go into a world and you can kind of customize an outfit or a car. This is going in, and basically I've learned everything you need to know about plant biology and plant growth, and you basically create a fruit. It's, you know, infinite. You come up with its segments, its seed placements, its colour, its texture, and where the segments fall and what height and protrusion rate they're at. And basically I then went, well, and then we have a machine learning behind it that comes up with its likeliness. So there's a banapsicum, part banana, part capsicum, and it comes up with the genetic changes you'd make to get that fruit, right? Then I thought, why try and plant this? Why not just print it? So then I worked with a materials scientist who came up with an agar solution for 3D printers, and we printed, when a kid comes in and makes a fruit, they can print it out and then eat it, and they can also digest whatever nutrients they're lacking. So in some parts of the country it was potassium, some parts it was magnesium, so we would smuggle in the nutrients and that got a lot of attention, and we made that in like 3 months, because it really is just extreme collaboration, making sure you get all the data and then put it together. This is a VR world where kids in hospitals, so we work with hospitals, they put on the VR, suddenly their room fills with water, their bed turns into a boat, and they play games with other kids all alone in hospital rooms. My family likes that at Christmas, that story. I've worked with Marvel as well to come up with a visualization of their massive 90-year-old universe. I basically come up with the films and the characters, and then you can explore what the characters' connections are, like who shares skills, who shares origins, who shares artifacts. I am the Marvel Whisperer. And Marvel studio executives now use this when people onboard Marvel, so they can see what the vast universe is. But the really interesting thing about this was seeing it in Goma in Brisbane and watching how people perform their status of knowledge with these sorts of things, which is really, really nice. And that's how people play games too, is they sort of perform status in it a lot of the times. And then I just took that model, and QUT asked me, could I do it for researchers? Who are their partners? Who are their, what are their methods? You know, what kinds of themes and thematic areas they work in, and we could find connections across those. Thea will be very upset with me showing that. And I've worked with fashion designers to come up with a system where they digitise their fashion, and then it gets shown on big screens for people to interact with, like I did with Marvel. Basically, you stand in front of this screen, you overtake the Iron Man or someone else. This was so fun to watch because either people dabbed, but whenever the Hulk came on, for some reason, everyone Cossack danced. It was so weird. Like, it was like constant. There was constant patterns there. Anyway, I'm down to my last minutes, but some games are hard to win. This is my favourite one that I've made. This is for cotton farmers to change the kinds of pesticides they use in their practice. Basically, they set their priorities. What is your environmental priority? What is your effort? What is your yield? And these are cognitive values. So this is their values they set up there. And then it runs a whole season, and it tells them, according to their values, which pesticide they should be using. So what the farmers work out very quickly is, I've either got to change my values or my pesticide. Right? So ergonomists use this to go around to farmers and change the sorts of pesticides they're using. We made this in like 6 months, and it's actually changing what toxins go into the waterways in Queensland. So these are the kinds of things that some games can do. So we're doing another one, plastics. I just rambled then, but basically I just wanted to show you kind of how one team can can collaborate with a lot of different people using one game engine to create these different types of experiences and tell these different stories. And it goes from not just visualising complexity of systems or playing around with the connections between those systems or experimenting with decision consequences. It's actually about helping them take action. So that cotton game, for example, at the end of the game, you print out your order for the year. So you actually now have an order system at the end of what pesticides you're getting throughout the season. So that's me. And I think I'm going to hand over to Johnson to talk a little bit about his practice, and then we'll just kind of do a 10-minute introduction each, and then we'll go into some questions. So thanks very much, Johnson.
Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi o te ata nei. Ko te mahi tuatahi e mihi atu ana au ki te iwi hau kainga. Ki rungi I tērā e mihi atu ana au ki Bill Nicholson, he kai kōrero. Just firstly a little acknowledgement to the people of the land here and to Uncle Bill for welcoming us into this amazing space. Secondly, I'm acutely aware that I'm a panel with 3 other wahine, with 3 other women, so I need to make sure that I acknowledge the other amazing people I'm on the stage here with. I'm going to try and talk slowly for 10 minutes. I'm going to kind of just really focus on one creative project, and in some ways how the stars align for me to end up creating a video game. And I'll talk a little bit, I guess, about the longer journey for me, like into this space. So as a student in high school, finishing up around 99, I wanted to be a game designer. You know, I was obsessed with games. I remember going to my neighbours who had computers and knocking on their door. I didn't even know them, and asking if I could play their computer, because I could see they had one through their window, and they'd let me play it. I'd be this random kid in their house playing the computer. So I think some of my friends around that age, maybe the relationships were formed because I found out at school that they had computers and I could play games with them. So I was very obsessed with computers, but, you know, video games, you know, being able to, I guess, be a game developer, that wasn't even a thing in the curriculum. There was software, there was programming. That didn't sound very sexy. I really loved art, and I really loved this digital stuff. And because I couldn't do video games, and when I looked at art, I thought, I want to get paid before I die. So I saw graphic design. I kind of went to this open day of my last year of school, found this amazing design school, and I thought, oh, okay, this is really cool. It combines technology and computers with art. You know, there's two things I've got a real interest in. So I started there. I started at graphic design school, and I thought I can learn the skills to make art, and maybe later on I can come around to making art. So I went on this long journey through design, which I absolutely love. There's kind of three versions of me these days. There's a designer Johnson, artist Johnson, and formerly still got a toe in academic space Johnson. But it started with designer version of me. Went through very traditional graphic design school, you know, learned about typography and Swiss and Bauhaus and German design and all those wonderful things, you know, about that European design lineage, which I'm still fascinated with. I'm still a typography nut. But I started going through that process, I guess, realizing firstly there was only 3 of us out of 200 students who were Māori at my school in New Zealand. There was something kind of missing there. And also looking at old photo albums in my house and realizing that the only thing that was Māori in the photos was the people. And as someone learning about design and starting to do design, I thought, it was like I was in the Matrix, you know? I started to develop a bit of a twitch, I think, because the only place I'd see my culture, you know, is at our marae. Some of you will be familiar with our car meeting houses and those things. And around that time, I started to make my mission in life is that how do I make everything in New Zealand and Aotearoa more Māori? How do I bring my Māori culture to everything? At the same time, I've always recognised my Pākehā, my, I guess, European, British, Scottish ancestry as well. You know, those aren't things I try and hide away or that I'm not proud of either. You know, for me, it's this journey of bringing those things together. So I went through graphic design school, did my master's, which was a Gestalt-based analysis of Māori carving to try and understand the principles and elements of Māori design. Thought I was really clever. Took that over to Māori Visual Arts School to do my doctorate. Realised that a Gestalt-based analysis of your cultural history is a very European way to put a lens over what you were studying. So I had a bit of a process of decolonising, I guess, you know, the way I understood and looked at Māori art and design. And then I went into my doctorate, and there I was just really interested again in how I might articulate and kind of develop Māori principles for thinking about and talking about design, because there were no guides for me. We've got heaps of carvers, we've got heaps of weavers, we've got heaps of tāmoko tattoo artists, like highly skilled experts with a ton of mātauranga Māori, like this massive knowledge base. But for someone doing like designing a typeface, designing toys, you know, and this, particularly in graphic design where we know it mixes into this commercial space, there was nothing there to really guide me. So I ended up going from this traditional graphic design space over to a contemporary Māori art school. Luckily enough, getting to have Bob Yankee as my supervisor, for some of that mahi, for some of you who know Bob. And there I was able to work a lot with Māori artists and Māori communities and to be supported by them to start to explore things. Initially, though, I just became the in-house graphic designer as I was doing my PhD, so everyone's catalogues ended up designing. They designed a typeface as part of that work. But yeah, later on, I came around again to making art and making design. Making art and bringing these tools I'd learned from design into that practice. Is this clicker going to work? Let's see. Oh no, I'm pointing out. Yeah, well, I just want to show you, you've seen an image up there. Do you want to come and give me a hand? Here we go. It's slowly going through. So there's just a couple more stills, and I'm going to show you a little video from this playbill artwork I made in around 2016, but I've just continued to iterate it and build it on different platforms. But when it came around, I had a side conversation with a curator about this idea to make a playbill artwork. And the reason I wanted to do it is, you know, my whānau, my family, they didn't take me to galleries or museums. The art I engaged with was in comic books and in video games. And I thought, well, here's a cool tool. Can I just use this to try and make some art as a way to engage with Māori, you know, as a way to engage with communities where I know they're not going to these spaces, but it's something we can kind of play with. I thought art's a really kind of fun and provocative kind of space that I can kind of do things and twist things around a little bit, be a bit Maui, as we'd say, you know, be a little bit more adventurous. And so I made I made these kind of parallel playable artworks as part of the show. And one of them you play a Māori character, one of them you play a missionary, and in each of them you arrive in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and you go across the landscape and interact with things in different ways. I'll see if I can get this video playing, and I'll just, because I think this is the thing that really seems to pique people's attention, and this was the artwork where you play a missionary figure arriving in Aotearoa. This is about 2.5 minutes, so it's perfect. And I'll narrate some of this, and you can kind of watch some of this, but you know, whakapapa is really important to me, so genealogy and making sure my art practice is really connected to the history of Māori art making. From the 1830s to 70s, there was this real growth of Māori painting in our carved meeting houses, and there were these really beautiful paintings of figures throughout. So I use those as the basis to generate these figures, and then when people look at these, they think, I've made them to look like this. But really, you can see where they come from. So you can play this, literally play this, like my own brothers. The missionary is picking up tongues. That's so that he can make a Māori Bible and colonize us faster, so he can kind of power up. And this is a really gross oversimplification, right, of the Māori engagement. But what was useful is, in the gallery space, this tricked people into the art. They would wander over to it, they would pick up the controls and just start playing with it. And a lot of Māori would say, this was fun, but I'm real conflicted because I was just colonizing myself as I was playing through this artwork, you know, and for me, I liked that, you know, some didn't like it. You know, in the parallel artwork where you're a Māori character arriving, you go across the landscape clubbing seals and whales and things, because that's also what happened. And this Aotearoa said to me that she didn't like that. She didn't want to bring her grandchildren to play this game. And I said, you might not like it, but it's what happened. And I said, I think you should be worried about them playing Grand Theft Auto, you know, rather than worry about the kind of content in here. But yeah, I just realized that there was so much magic in this, when people would kind of walk up, start engaging with it, start playing with it, and then start having kind of deep reflections on what was happening and what they were kind of doing throughout this. This little one's almost at the end. But you can see they become, the Māori figures become lighter, their clothing changes obviously, our tāmoko, you know, our tattooed faces change and all these sorts of things. And we are almost, Thomas is based on Thomas Kendall, a really well-known missionary. And some of more of our, I guess, prominent institutions turned into different institutions and got merged into other sorts of institutions as well. So it was funny for me, this long process, thank you, going from these years of graphic design to making all these things. And when I finally made this, I'm like, I finally made it to make that game design stuff I wanted to do as a teenager. Now I'm on the New Zealand Game Developers Association for video games as the voice for Māori in that space. But yeah, it's just, it's really exciting and it's really fun the way you can kind of invert things and create something really engaging. So yeah, kia ora koutou.
Hello. Hope everyone's going well. So despite this shameless avatar of myself, it is actually my nightmare to talk about myself, especially my practice, because it requires you to have a degree of self-knowledge that I find threatening. But let's have a go. So this is a still from a video work that's part of a larger work I made that I'll talk about a bit later. But it's basically a representation of growing up online in the noughties and how that felt to me. And I think it's a cool place to start because unlike you, I didn't grow up with this sort of burning desire to be a game developer or with my eye on that. And I've been thinking about why, mostly prompted by this talk. Again, too much reflection. But I think it's because when something's like air, you're not really thinking about it. So, you know, I was a casual gamer and I was very online as a kid. But yeah, it wasn't like something I considered my direction as part of my practice. My kind of where I started and what is still part of, oh, is it this one? still part of, like, a large part of my work is in theatre. And I've done a lot of text-based theatre, which is like your more traditional plays. This is a still from a Red Stitch show. This is from Ala Brandy at the Malt House. Thank you. Last year. And those are like kind of things where you prepare a script and you hand it off to a director and then you turn up on opening and then you see it. But my actual training in theatre and the form that I really love and continue to practice and experiment with is, and this might sound a bit cultural studies lecture for a bit, so bear with me, but it's called contemporary performance. And I don't know if that's a term that many people are familiar with. This is a still from a UK company called Forced Entertainment, who I've been really influenced by. And I'm just going to talk about some characteristics of this form of making and training. And I think the game devs in the room might be like, oh, you're talking about the same thing we do. But it took me a long time to understand that. So contemporary performance is kind of a form of performance that, unlike traditional theatre, which is often a narrative, is not really interested in the three-act structure so much as starting from a point of an idea or an experience to explore and how that makes people feel, and how to escalate the concept of something rather than actually finish a story in a really linear way. It's also very interested in liveness, and that's a huge part of my work. And by liveness, I guess it's the acknowledgement that we're all in this space together. The audience are a really important part of the work. In fact, they're essential to completing it. And so audience agency is something that I've been thinking about a lot from the time I started making. Again, a parallel there with gaming. It's also something that has, I think, an innate politics. It comes out of like a very political movement in the 60s. It's sort of about relational understanding and the systems we're working in. And a lot of the methodology you use to create this work is basically games and play-based making. So often we'll be in the room, we'll create structures with rules to break or to see what kind of relationships develop through them, what ideas develop through them. And sometimes, like this show, for instance, the whole show is like a Q&A with the audience. So that's like a structure, and how do you break that structure? And we often use that even like to devise the work itself. Yeah, so that's kind of, and that form of playfulness is really important when you're making it, and playfulness with collaborators, and a real sense of like non-hierarchy in the room, and the fact that the work is better, because to play something you often need more than one person. So a lot of my work's been influenced by that. A lot of my indie theatre comes from that form. And so a lot of my early works were, I guess, exploring, if we're talking about like rules and systems, like what are the rules of the body when it walks on stage? What is the difference of the rules for like white femme queerness or brown femme queerness? Yeah, what's inter-Asian dialogue, and how does that relational understanding manifest? And then playing games with the audience as we go. I've also worked a lot in comedy, evidence, and comedy is a kind of like a subset of this form. It relies on the audience, it relies on being very responsive, and there are also rules that you kind of break or like try and escalate there as well. Yeah, and sometimes you're bitten by a swan. A few years ago, I made this participatory artwork called The Lizard is Present. And I don't know if people know, but the artist Marina Abramovic, she did this famous artwork called The Artist is Present, where she sat opposite like celebrities in a gallery and stared at them, and they stared back and they cried. And you know, I'm sure it was very moving, but for some reason, the phrase Marina Abramovic got stuck in my head, and this was... and this is the result. And I think I was thinking about like the deification of celebrity artists and just the art world and how venal and corrupt it can be. Basically, at the time I didn't think of it this way, but what I ended up creating was an ARG, like an alternate reality game. And it was sort of this durational performance that like took place, first of all these happenings around like the creeks in Melbourne, and like people would just start participating in it. And it went on for a year, and ultimately we also got like serious art critics to write about it, like it was real, which is like part of the play of it. And yeah, eventually ended up in this like massive gala where people walked the green carpet. And and like were tweeting about it. And I think what this really opened up for me was this idea of creating play in, yeah, that was green face, creating play in different modes. So like the people who were online were finding different games to play there, and the people who were IRL in the gala had their own thing going on. And it was also like a really interesting way of, starting a cult in a sense, and like understanding how to get people in real time at that level and in those many modes sort of collaborating on world building in a way that's delightful. So I guess, oh yeah, and that happened. I guess I want to talk a bit about the internet, but I don't know how much time I have. I guess the internet's always been a big part of my work, even the stuff that's been a bit more like just stage-based. This was a show about like catfishing basically as a game through the mode of Pikachu and Pokemon Go. As the pandemic began, and I think this would have happened anyway, I guess like a lot of our work went online, and I started to do more like performance work that was situated completely in the online sphere or brought like online elements into real space. This was a work for dancers where they were controlled by live scrolling remotely. And then I made like, because the pandemic kept going, I got commissioned to make a game, and I never actually realized I'd never made one just for the browser or digitally. And it's just a Twine game called Real-Time Cancellation Adventure. It's still up at Liminal magazine. And I had the best time doing it. You basically play as somebody on your way to receive a very coveted mentorship from a woman of colour, but she's cancelled along the way, like on the tram on your way there, and you have to take a side. But obviously things go really wrong. What I found really interesting when I was sitting there like coding this was like how it reminded me so much of actually the kind of ways I made performance, the sort of how I was thinking about the audience, how I was thinking about affect and movement as we went through it. There was also a rat. Then I decided to like focus more on browser-based work, and this is probably like one of the major things I've made recently. It's called In Search of Lost Scroll, and it's a speculative fiction game / I don't know, performance artwork that's fully for the browser. And I was really interested in examining how in the future, like what happens to data ethics, and I just had this persistent vision of myself being turned into a bot and all my data like used to basically help people chat in an old folks' home, because that's probably what my tweets would be good for. So you play as somebody, and I've decided to, also I want to die. So my bot asks you to delete it, and you kind of have to decide whether you want to do that or not. And as you do, the internet glitches, and we kind of like travel through basically a time machine of the last 15 years of growing up online. Yeah, I have put, if you can get your phone out before this ends in the next minute, there's a QR code where you can talk to me. Yeah, I will ask you to delete me, but and that will launch you into the game. So it's just, it may be a bit confusing, but you may just want to talk. We trained it on like too many tweets, too many embarrassing tweets, and a few people have actually thought it was me sitting there talking to them, which is not actually very flattering. And at the moment, I guess, now that I feel like my brain has dissolved the boundaries between even thinking of separate forms or spaces for my work. So I've started to work more deliberately with game developers. And this is a work that I'm making for Arts House that will hopefully go up next year. And it literally smashes the two forms that I'm interested in together. We use like an audition process for actors and map it onto like generating mocap avatars, but like that's the mechanic. I can explain that more when we're sitting down. And I'm also making something for ACME, which is for Games Week. And I'm actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to show this just yet, so I'll keep going. I'll go back somehow. Yeah, we can go back to that. But yeah, that's with a developer called Ian McLarty, and that's been a really interesting process as well of working from someone's more technical instincts and then bringing kind of, I guess, my interactive understanding of things. And we're making a slot machine that's a bit weird. Yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at the moment. If you missed out, there you go. Thanks.
Hi all, this is my nightmare, so bear with me. I and I'm not very organised with this, so I'm just going to wing it, okay? So my name is Jarra Karalinar Steele. I'm Bunurong, Wemba Wemba and Toolaway, Woolmanjika, to the land of my ancestors you are currently on. I am someone who has done a lot of different random things when it comes to the creative arts. You know, I've studied fashion design, costume, theatre, props, set construction. I've done film. I used to design websites when I was a kid, which is, I realise now is actually I designed them as games, and I didn't realise at the time. Unfortunately, GeoCities doesn't exist anymore, so I can't show you all these amazing little magical moments of the late 90s that I created, and now realising, oh, that was a thing. This work that I'm showing you of a previous work that existed that now is thankfully gone for, I don't know, hopefully a long time, but it's up to the councils, I guess. Using my augmented reality possum spirits. So this was done during the 2020 first lockdowns. I was studying my Masters of Public Art. How do you create public art in a lockdown, basically, was a thing. So I had been wanting to do augmented reality for a long time. And so I created these kind of possum spirits. Was sort of, the design was based on a dead possum I found. And I just kind of built that from there. And then I got all my friends and whoever was interested to take that 3D model, use Adobe Aero to take that possum spirit wherever they were, or their little special spots, or their, you know, I had one friend who was in Brooklyn, New York, and took it from their rooftop while they were locked inside. So that was really an interesting project, and I think the collaboration of working with an audience was really something that I really enjoyed. And I always have fun with my little possum spirits. My wallet Marup, which I didn't put in here, but there's also physical forms of it in Stevenson's Lane, right next to Section 8 and 30 Dirk, if you want to see some physical ones at night. I also have them in this game that was a collaboration with Playable Melbourne, and it was for the Clarendon Street Arcade. I did all these designs. A big part of my work is actually doing, you know, my own versions of designs from Southeast Kulin nations, my Bunurong heritage, because we don't see that enough, and that comes from us. So I included that in this work, as well as my wallet Marups, and my mother did the languages. So you take the little possum, and there's 4 players, and you go on a journey to discover language, and Mum will speak it back to you, and it just goes on. But the more people that come in, the sounds kind of blend together, and it becomes an orchestra, which is really beautiful. It's called Yawa, which means journey in Kulin. Sorry, I'm not good at this, so hopefully I get through this. So there's another photo of people enjoying it. Thanks to Troy for sending that to me last night. And then this work was more recent. This was a projection piece that I did for Now and Nether, that was curated by Experimenter. They were basically like, we really want to support you in doing something interesting. I've worked on like a lot of 3D models and stuff like that, and so we kind of animated this, and I worked with the VU Hive Lab to help animate it in After Effects. And I wish I could have put a video in this, because it's what it is sort of like a poem in a way. So you have what I see as dancing ancestors, and then these flowers, and it slowly reveals like, I am my ancestors, I am my ancestors' revenge. So the idea is basically, you know, taking back, you know, these spaces using the tools which, the intergenerational labour of my mother and my grandmother and my great-great-grandmother, Louisa Briggs, and just sort of going, hey, I'm going to put these things in space where they belong, because this is in Docklands on our country. And these are some of the elements of the piece. So I created this for ACME's 2020 NAIDOC week, also during lockdown. And they're just like with my possum spirits and the flowers that I used. I also had an art tram in 2021, and then after that I became the curator of the Rising Melbourne Art Trams, and I've done it for the last 3 years. And it's been really special because not only do I get to work with incredible artists here in Victoria that are from my community, but I get to showcase them and show a different side of what Aboriginal art can be on a public, it's probably one of the most accessible forms of art in the city because it goes everywhere and it's movable. And, especially when this was out, it was right before the May lockdown. And, I was getting messages from people who were like, I'm really struggling, and this brought a bit of sunshine my day. So the trams have been really special to me. Look out for the new lot in June and the ones currently on the tracks now. This was a really special moment. I have a bunch of large-scale public art pieces in language around the city. They're permanent pieces. This was part of Flash Forward. I think it was 2021. I can't remember days anymore. And this is Yuan country because I think we forget that, yes, it is a city, it's built up, but it's still sacred land, it's still country. I have so many people, a lot of my community will be like, oh, I'm going out to country. And I'm like, I'm already here. This is country for me. There's other works. There's actually 4 in the series. One of them is still not out yet, but I've been assured that they're fixing it and it's going to be out in April, and that'll be really special. But they're around, and I think you can find more information on that on Flash Forward's website. This was a piece I did for ACME's How I See It, which was open during the early part of last year. The idea around this was, one, I wanted to do a game, and I wish I saw your arcade game previous, because that would have been like, oh, awesome. And I grew up going to arcades a lot. Like, there used to be a time zone on Burke Street, and I wasn't allowed to go in the ones on Russell Street because, people you'd walk past there and be trying to get you to get drugs and stuff, and my mum and dad no. So we'd always go to the time zone, and I'd kick my brother's ass in Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat until he got better. And so I wanted to bring that kind of nostalgia of an arcade into the ACME space, using my own visual iconography. I collaborated on the game with Charlotte Allingham, who did the beautiful artwork in Dolly, and we inserted people from kind of amalgamate, that's Mum actually, the redhead, but others were sort of amalgamation of people that we had in our community, like aunties and uncles and stuff like that. And the idea was to be in a world that is, it's Melbourne, but it's a future where our culture and art and our existence is taken more seriously and inserted into the country. So there's parts where, you get off the tram and you walk past Tendarum Square. Why is it called Fed Square? I know it was launched during Federation, but, Tendarum Square. The statue of Flinders is no longer down there. St Paul's is gone. Sorry. I had some patterns inscribed onto the machine. It's somewhere in storage here. Hopefully they'll tour it again one day. And the statement, for them it was just a game, and for us it was life, is kind of a two thing. Oh, sorry, I'm so slow on this. But it's sort of like how our gameplay isn't taken seriously, but also the way that governments use our cultures and our connections to country as a game for them. So 1 minute we're, it's Bunurong country and suddenly it's not. So that was a big thing and a part of that. And then I've done augmented reality art. Sorry, I will finish up soon. Thank you. With Troy Innocent and the 64 Ways of Being. Troy was great to work with and has been a really good collaborator. And you can take a little tour, and Mum tells the story of the area, and you kind of can do a little walk with augmented reality game, and that's it. So thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. So we had some questions that we kind of shared, but I think we've covered a lot of it. But is there anything more you might want to say about what kind of aspects or attributes or mechanics, aesthetics of play and games, like why games? Why are you adopting them in your practice?
I'll jump in there. Like, one of the things I found, I learned, was how hard it is to make a bloody game. I'd made lots of video art, made lots of projected art, and I thought I'll just make a playable artwork. It won't be that hard. Make some characters, make them do stuff. It was so hard. It took so long, and I knew that for it to work, for the magic to work, it had to look and feel and function like a polished game. I've never had to playtest artworks before. It ended up being this kind of technical nightmare. It was like the first time I tried to design a typeface. I was like, oh, easy, it's just a font, it's just these letters. And it took me 2 years to figure out how to do it. So yeah, I learned a lot about how to make games. I don't know if I'll ever do one again. I thought, sadly, I play games about once a month these days because I'm just too busy doing all this other adult stuff. So it's almost like I had to make a game so I had a chance to play some games. So. Yeah.
But what might you take from that? You might not make a game using a game engine again, but might you take from that might segue into other parts of your practice? I love this thing of a personal game has to become communal when you need to work out how to use different technologies and things.
There's probably two things. One was, it's a really useful way to extend to an audience beyond a gallery. And there's one really reason, I mentioned it earlier, I really wanted to make it, is I could have art go out beyond this gallery space, even though I love working in it. And I guess in terms of the practice, it was the other thing was games are a really useful way to trick you to make it, into engaging with really complex and really challenging ideas. So I'd probably really try and take those forward.
I think that was common across, and I think that what you were talking about in terms of taking them out of the museum context, but it's even taking them out of the game publication context as well. So, Jarra, you also do games in place as well. What did you learn about the sort of the opportunities and limitations of kind of games and play in place in that kind of way?
I think for me, I think it's partly I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, so I can learn a bit about everything, but not having the exact skills to do the thing I want to do, which is great though, because as I've built my practice, I've learned I can work with people, and I'm not in isolation all the time with my work. And I've met incredible people in my life, and through, I didn't mention it, but working with GUC, who, I can be like, hey, I want to do this thing, let's do it. And Troy also has been a really great supporter in that as well. I've come kind of a long journey to get to games, which is something, sorry, I know it's not your question. But, it's something I've always wanted to do, but like you, there was no access to game making in the, when I graduated in 2001, everyone was pushing us into tech, and I could code, and I made websites, and I could do all these things, but I was like, I don't want to do that. Everyone's going to tech. There won't be jobs. And I was right. And I also wanted to do creative arts because everyone got, there was too many of us. And, there wasn't opportunities. And I think as well, when you don't have that and you don't have belief in those things and you have big pictures, it can be hard, and you make them in the background. But so getting into games now has been really exciting. Sorry if I yeah, sorry, I'm really tired today.
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about, you know, I got to watch you watch others play your game in Clarendon Street, and that was really interesting. That thing I think we mentioned also, you know, when you put stuff out in public, it has to be vigorous enough and rigorous enough to withstand the scrutiny on all kinds of levels, you know, the technical levels, all those kinds of levels. And I guess, Vidya, when you're putting yourself in the performance as well, that's even more so, right?
Yes, I guess so. I feel like the last few things that I've made, I haven't had to be there either because they lived online, or I'm working with other actors or performers, or it just runs on its own, like this recent thing that I wasn't supposed to talk about. But yeah, I think, but it's a thing of like, I guess in what you call in game design, like emergent play, and like the actor's just another element, or the body or the person's another element of that. And so like as long as you're present, you can't go wrong, as long as you've built like a performance machine or a game structure around it, because that's what the intention of the game is, to respond to that person. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And we've got also some questions which align with some of the questions we were kind of considering as well. One of them was about how, you know, because a lot of us don't use games as they're designed to be used. We kind of adopt, adapt, hack them to do what we need them to do. So I guess, like, how can artists, institutions, groups sort of adopt kind of not just game technologies, but game approaches, player mechanics to move towards positive and even more radical kind of change within systems? Go for it.
Diversify your team a little bit. Also, I think, you know, there's still a lot of misogyny within the games industry, and a lot of racism as well. And especially, like, I have, you know, there's a lot of games out there that, you know, they want to use our culture and our art and stuff like that, and then they'll bring on someone as a kind of consultant, or a young person who doesn't have the ability to know when they can say no, or something like that, and then it ends up being black-clouded rather than us being able to create our own games. And that's a big problem within the industry. But also, like, you know, they're going, oh, but there's no one out there to do that, because there's no opportunities. So we need to do more mentorship programs where people are paid to attend, more opportunities to reach young people sooner to get into the industry, to learn how to do these things, because those skills are transferable throughout any industry. But I think that's a big part of it. And also compassion. And I know this is a industry where you have to go. You know, there's little money, there's even little amount of time. But, you know, especially when it comes to our community and the work that I've done with GARC, is we deal with so much intergenerational trauma, deaths, griefs, and, you know, systems where we've had employment trauma that all compiles and stops progress of games. And you have to have the ability to go, okay, let's stop, let's not push this, you know, and it's hard, but it is facts, and it happens. So those are things that I think is something that I think should be a bit better. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
I mean, I guess I was just thinking about, you have to accept perhaps that the kind of player who's conceptualized for most games, and this goes across art forms, but I think is quite stark in like, you know, usually especially like AAA games and stuff, is there's a demographic for that, and there's a certain assumption like of conquest in a lot of games that's built into it, just in the way you accumulate or win, like the win conditions of games and things like that. So, and who is that player that's made for? And I think the assumption is this is a person who exists everywhere and is the default of the world, but there are lots of other kinds of people who want to get very different feelings from things, and I think it's not being deterred by the people who say that you should make it in that mode, because those other players / audience members exist. Yeah.
I think they're building on that, you know, like their win conditions things, or like the narrative is really interesting. Because I know when people kind of got to the end of what I'd shown you, someone would say, well, what's next? You know, like, when's the game end? I'd say, it has it. I said, we're still colonised. So the game hasn't finished, it's still ongoing.
Yeah, there's a great talk by this narrative designer called Meg Giant called The Imperial Pleasures of Game Design. And it's basically about this kind of thing and how that's the default point of view. And kind of helped me understand that. I realized that whenever I try and write something in game, or even make stuff, I'm writing from the NPC perspective, and everything falls into chaos rather than into a coherent win. And to me, because I do stuff quite humorously, I think I didn't quite recognize it as also a political point that not everybody's trying to conquer or accumulate the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think Eric mentioned stereotype engines, and which was really interesting. And also, I think VR, when it first came out, was called Empathy Machine, which I think's been debunked, thank goodness, since then. And, I think games and play can also be consequence engines, so it's not just about winning, it's about learning the consequences of action. So it's a sort of using the kind of basics of the programming capabilities of a game to kind of maybe just understand systems better and the interventions that happen in these worlds.
Going back to kind of opening things up more in these sorts of spaces, we had a little conversation earlier, and I was saying when I first applied to Creative New Zealand to get funding to make these artworks, I had video game all through my application and it got rejected because they don't fund video games. I changed video game to playable artwork. I put the same application in and I got the funding. And I understand actually, they don't fund making video games, but it was a terminology thing, that I had to tweak this thing to make sense. And I know why they're not given tasks with funding those sorts of things. But it really bugged me actually afterwards because people kept going, oh, you made that, we saw that video game you made. And I'm like, it's just a tool. I said, I made a playable artwork, and they keep saying it and I keep getting annoyed because I don't think of myself as a game designer. I just think of myself as trying to make interesting things, I guess.
Thank you. I think what's wonderful is what we've all talked about is how games can be used as provocation tools, not just saving princesses and winning races. So thank you very much. I'm sure everyone here is really keen to know what all of you are going to do next. And so thank you very much for participating in this panel. And we've got Jeff Williams next to introduce the next panel, but please join me in thanking these wonderful panellists today.